All right, let's dive in. We're talking about a revolution that is completely reshaping the gaming universe as we know it. This is Web3 gaming, and it's a huge shift. I mean, it's not just changing how we play games, but the very meaning of what it is to play. And it all boils down to one simple, really powerful idea. So think about this. That epic sword you ground for hundreds of hours. Imagine it was actually yours. For real. Not just something you're renting from a game company, but something you could prove you own. You could trade, you could sell, just like a physical thing you can hold in your hand. That, right there, is the heart of what Web3 gaming is all about. And look, this is not some tiny niche corner of the internet. We're talking about a market that's projected to absolutely explode. It's going to go from about $4.6 billion in 2023 to almost $29 billion by 2030. That's not just growth. That's a complete economic rewiring of the entire gaming industry. Okay, but whenever you have that much money, that much value on the table, well, the stakes get incredibly high. When your digital items have real-world value, they also become real-world targets for thieves. So that leads to the big question, right? How in the world do we keep all of this safe? So let's get into it. You can think of this as a new kind of gold rush. We're entering a brand new era of player ownership. And believe me, it is changing everything. So what is Web3 gaming really? Well, at its core, it's about building games on blockchain technology. What that does is it lets all the in-game stuff, your characters, your cool gear, maybe a plot of land, be turned into unique digital tokens called NFTs. And what that means for you, the player, is that for the very first time, you can prove you own the things you worked so hard for in the game. It's transparent, it's verifiable, it's yours. And just look at the speed of this thing. The growth is just staggering. We're talking a compound annual growth rate of 30%. This isn't just hype, It's a massive wave of investment and, more importantly, player excitement. It's all fueled by these new ideas like play to earn, where the time you put into a game can actually create real-world value. That, plus the huge appeal of actually owning your digital stuff, is what's driving this explosion. Okay, so how does all of this tech actually work? Let's pop the hood and take a look at the engine room of Web3, the code that's making this whole new world tick. The real backbone of any Web3 game is something called a smart contract. The best way to think about it is like it's the ultimate unbreakable rule book for the game. It's just code that lives on the blockchain, and it automatically enforces all the rules: how items get made, who wins a battle, how loot gets distributed. There's no company server in the middle changing things. It's just transparent, unstoppable code that everyone can see and trust. Now, when developers are building these games, they basically have two main choices for the backend. On one hand, you can build a totally custom backend. This gives you complete control, you can optimize everything, but man, it takes a lot of time and a ton of expertise. The other option is using what's called a Backend-as-a-Service. This is way faster, with pre-built features, and it costs less upfront. The trade-off? You give up a lot of flexibility and you're kind of stuck with that provider. Okay, now for the really critical part. Because these smart contracts are dealing with real money, and they're often immutable, which basically means you can't easily change them once they're out there, a single tiny flaw in the code can be an absolute disaster. So let's talk about where this whole thing can go wrong. Just let this number sink in for a second. Over $250 million. Gone. In just 6 months, all because of mistakes in the code. We're not talking about some theoretical what-if scenario here. This is happening right now, and it has devastating consequences for the games and, of course, for the players who lose their assets. And the attacks come from all sides. You've got bugs directly in the smart contract code, like something called a re-entrancy attack. A good way to picture that is like a broken ATM that lets a hacker withdraw money again and again before the machine realizes the balance is gone. But it's not just code. There are also phishing scams trying to trick you, the player, into giving up your info, and even totally malicious contracts designed from the start to just steal everything in your wallet. It's a really tough environment to secure. So, okay, the stakes are insanely high. How are the good guys fighting back? Well, it's not just about squashing a few bugs here and there. It's about building a complete digital fortress, right from the very foundation. Let's get into how they're doing it. The key thing to understand here is that the pros don't just, run a spell check on the code and call it a day. Security is built in layers, a whole process. It all starts with governance, figuring out who's responsible when things go wrong. Then you design for security from day one.
After that, you need hardcore auditing, both by your own team and outside experts. Then you have a super careful, controlled deployment. And it doesn't stop there. You have to keep monitoring and managing it for the entire life of the game. And inside that big framework, there are some really smart, specific things developers do. For starters, they use existing battle-tested code libraries. Why reinvent the wheel and introduce new bugs, right? They also build in an emergency pause button, a way to freeze the contract if something goes haywire. They use things like Chainlink VRF to make sure any randomness in the game is truly random and can't be cheated. And this one's huge. They pay for independent third-party audits to get a fresh pair of expert eyes on their code before anyone plays.
Now, one of the biggest game changers for both security and just making games playable has been Layer 2 solutions. The analogy here is perfect. If the main blockchain, think Ethereum, is a super congested highway at rush hour, Layer 2s are like these brand new high-speed side roads. They take a bunch of the traffic off the main highway, process it faster and way cheaper, which in turn actually reduces the chances for attacks and makes the whole system stronger. And these Layer 2 rollups come in two main flavors. First, you have optimistic rollups. They basically work on a trust but verify model. They assume all the transactions are good to go, but there's a window of time where anyone can challenge one if they spot fraud. They're a bit simpler to build. Then you have ZK rollups. These are different. They use some seriously fancy math to generate a proof that every single transaction is valid before it even gets submitted. It's more complex tech for sure, but it means things are finalized way faster. Your in-game actions are confirmed almost instantly. Both are super important for making these games work at scale. So all of this brings us to what's next, the future. We've seen how complicated the tech is and just how high the stakes are. And what's become crystal clear is that securing this new world of digital ownership, well, it's not a one-person job. And really, this is the main takeaway. Security in Web3 is a partnership. It's a shared responsibility. The developers have to build the digital fortress, secure code, audits, all of it. But you, the user, you're the one holding the keys to the gate. You have to protect your private keys, which are basically the master password to your entire digital life. That means using secure hardware wallets and just being super careful about scams.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. As gaming gets more open, as players own more and more of the world they play in, who's ultimately on the hook for keeping it all safe? The lines are definitely getting blurry. This isn't a future that's just built for players anymore. It's one that has to be built with them.